Eastern Hot Rodder, and we're here today to talk about gassers. The reason I picked this subject today is because everybody loves gassers. Everybody loves watching them run and all that other stuff, and there's a lot of people that build them for the street. But there's a lot of misconceptions out there of what is and isn't a gasser and the history of the class and everything. So today we're going to kind of delve into the history of it, hit on some points to help you build your car to have that period correct look that you're going for, and try to keep it within the guidelines of what was historically a gasser. Now, of course, you can always make your own take on it, but we're going to take it from there. So first thing we're going to talk about is the brief history of it. So nothing hits on the brief history better than actually digging into the stuff that was there when it was done. So old magazines are a great resource if you're trying to build any kind of historic car. So here I have some stuff out here: Super Stock Magazine, Drag Strip, Drag Racing in Action, Rod and Custom. Of course, I got your usuals, the Car Crafts and Hot Rod magazines that were around in the day. Those are great pictorial and factual histories of looking at the cars. You can pick up a lot of information there. The other thing, one of the things I really like about old magazines is I use them for references to try to find out when certain speed parts became available, so you can flip through and look at the ads that are in there and stuff like that. I got a couple books here. Gasser Wars. Awesome book. I like it so much. I actually have 2 copies of it. I think it might be out of print now. I'm not 100% sure on that, but Car Tech Books is where you'd probably find that one if it's still in print. And another one that was put out by them is Diggers, Funnies, Gassers, and Alters. It has a chapter on each one of those that's on the cover. And that'll help break down, give you some good, cool pictures and stuff like that. There's great pictures in there. Like, for example, that wheelie shot there is just awesome. It gives you a good shot of a well-designed front suspension that can handle it. That was in '72, so that's a later gasser. But what we're going to do is focus on this stuff. When I was flipping through this, I have hundreds and hundreds of magazines, and I was flipping through some to try to pull some eye candy for you for the gas class coverage. One of the magazines I came up with was like, this one was like perfect that I found this one. It's got class drag racing classifications, and this is 1967 magazine. So this gives you kind of a brief look at and a summary of each one of the gas class cars designations that they had. Now you got to remember that the gasser class, the cars had to run on gasoline. So just about every one of these, with a few exceptions, would run on gasoline. But the big thing here is gas coupes and sedans. Let me see if I can read this upside down. Retaining stock bodies and often appearing to be stock, except for big slicks and slight exterior modifications, the gas coupes and sedans are tailored for all-out performance. So these guys, and you can see the gas classes that were listed here, A-gas on up, and there's also supercharged classes, which we'll get into towards the end of the video. These cars had to retain their street equipment right there. It says, while still retaining all of the necessary equipment to remain legal for street operations. Now, that requirement eventually faded away, and actually, I think for what I've been reading online, a couple different websites will give you references too, they say that went away earlier on than this magazine, but this magazine was printed in '67, so I imagine these guys had their facts straight pretty good. There's a lot to a gasser, and we'll get into that in this video. First off, gassers had to retain just about all the stock body panels. They could be chopped up to 4 inches. That was the limit on them. But the cars had to retain that fairly stock appearance. Radius of wheel wells was cool, but you could not take a pre-war car and yank the fenders off it. That would put you clearly into the altered class. The difference between gas altered and gas coupe and sedan class was sometimes a hood panel, depending on how the tech inspector looked at it and wanted to do the class designation. In this book here, Gasser Wars, they show a 33 Willys where the guy would run in the gas class with the 33 Willys nose on it, but underneath that 33 Willys nose, he had the radiator mounted in a Model A grill shell. So if competition in the gas coupe and sedan class was too heavy, he'd yank the nose off and run in the altered class. So sometimes it was as simple as that. The body modifications, again, had to be kept to kind of a minimum. You were allowed to use plexiglass windows from 62 and up, I believe, and you could run fiberglass panels, hood, doors, and stuff like that. But once you went to a fiberglass panel, you had to put a roll cage in. It wasn't based on your speed at that time. So how did the gasser classes come to be? Well, early on in the NHRA history, they had just a few classes for racing. They had your stock class, which the cars had to remain extremely stock, very, very limited modifications on that. And you had your altered class, which everybody kind of has an idea what an altered is. Those bodies could be cut down, chopped, narrowed, widened, slammed, stretched. The wheelbases could be altered like crazy. And you could do all sorts of stuff in those classes. So then you also had, of course, the dragster classes. So there was very few classes in there. So there wasn't a class set aside for Johnny Hot Rod. There wasn't a spot where someone could show up in their 40 Ford with an overhead valve V8 swap put into it for them to run. The car was not modified enough to be competitive and altered, but it wasn't stock enough any longer to run in the stock classes. So they came up with the gas classes. Now those cars had to be street legal. They had to have license plates, insurance. They had to have all working equipment. So they went through a traffic safety inspection, more or less, as they went through their tech inspection. So as the years went on, those rules started to get bent more and more. Wiper arms could be just like a little hand thing. And they had to have full interiors, but those full interiors, you didn't have to have a back seat. You could run fiberglass buckets. You could run Naugahyde interior. You had to have something in there, but it didn't have to be heavy stock weight stuff. So, and of course, every year that limit got pushed, so they would adapt the rules to it. The big thing on all those gas class things is they had to run gasoline. And as the years went on, these cars got more and more radical, and they had to put in some different stopgaps to keep the cars a little safer as they go through the years. And the thing was, they were still just a cool looking hot rod. Now we get into our suspensions and stuff. This is where the NHRA started to step in. You did not have to have a straight axle to have a gasser. There was plenty of cars, especially C-Gas on down, that ran independent front suspensions. A lot of times they drill holes in the control arms to lighten them up, but there was a lot of independent front suspension cars that really hauled. One of them that I can think of is the Golden Gasser. That car was always an independent front suspension car. Swiss cheese like crazy to keep it light. This solid axle became a way to save weight. If your car came with a solid axle from the factory, you probably weren't swapping in an IFS to make it go faster. You were probably sticking with a stick axle under the front. The stick axles went under a lot of the cars to lighten them up. You could save about 200 pounds. The height, when everybody thinks of the classic gasser look, they want that nose-high stance. There was a limit to that because the cars were getting higher and higher in the front in order to try to shift the weight to the back axle for better traction to compensate for the not-so-great slicks that they had of the day. They kept shifting that center line of that mass higher and higher, and the cars began to get more and more unstable. So NHRA set up a rule that's still on the books today for almost every class except for, I think, diesel trucks have the exception for it. It's a 24-inch crankshaft centerline rule. So measuring from the ground to the center of your crankshaft on your engine, so the harmonic balancer bolt, could not be more than 24 inches off the ground. So there was not anything in the rule books that said you had to be nose high. There was nothing in the rule books that said that it had to have a straight axle, but it did limit how high you could go for safety reasons. And while we're talking about engines, to make it easier for engine swaps, they offered a rule of a 10% engine setback, meaning that as measured from your farthest forward spark plug to the center line of your front axle, that motor could be back 10% of your wheelbase. So if you had a 100-inch wheelbase, you can move that motor back 10 inches. And that was where that had to stay. If you went farther than that, that puts you into altered class. Again, there was a lot of times where a car looked like a gasser. By all means, it did, but because of one simple thing, whether it didn't run on gasoline or the motor was set back a little too far, it would change it. A good example of that one is right here, this Fantasia Willys. This car was built to be a fuel car. This car ran on fuel. It did not run on gas. And the motor is set back really far. You can see the headers coming out. So the engine's sitting pretty far back on this car. So this car did not run in the gas class. It looks like a gasser, but it didn't smell like a gasser. So it did not run in the gas class. Another car will come over here, and I'm sorry, it's this magazine. This one here, we got the Green Scene 55 Chevy. This was a very famous car in its time. This ran, you can see on the roof right there, X stock. So this car these guys built a lot of gasser kits, and these guys had a lot of people and customers that were gasser guys. So they built this car to not run as a gasser, but they ran in the experimental stock class where they can run nitro. The car ran like 880s, 890s all the time with a big block Chevy in it. So that car was, even though it looked like a gasser, It was not a gasser. Had a solid front axle, but it was not nose high. Then here's another good page to stay open to. We got to talk about wheelbase. The wheelbase had to remain the same as the stock car that the car was built on. If you alter the wheelbase, you end up getting an altered or an early funny car, or whatever the other class that the car would fit into. But an altered wheelbase car is not a gasser. It could run gasoline, but it would not be your typical gas class car. So the designation wouldn't have that /G on it. This is a really cool example, and this is a neat little article on this one. This is the centerfold of Superstock magazine, January 1967. There's 255 Chevy gassers here. One lettered up. Well, again, it's not the actual gasser. This is the green scene car again. Solid axle in this car, independent front suspension in this car. These cars are still, if he ran gas in his car, he would fit in the gas class. This is a gas class car here. What's cool about this article talks about the 55 Chevy, and what I thought was interesting is in closing, someday 55 Chevys will command the prices that deuces and A's are going for today. And boy, is that true. Boy, the price of Tri-5s is through the roof right now. Check this out. This is a July of '65 Rod and Custom magazine. There's a nice article on a Falcon gasser there. A gas, stock wheelbase, motor setback. You can see it sits under the cowl. That's a 10% engine setback to take advantage of that. So it's taking advantage of that weight shift. The car's not overly high. It sits pretty level. And that was '65. On another Rod and Custom magazine, we have a pair of wheelies on the cover. This one was an old drag strip car. This car never saw the drag strip, but was built in the same vein as an old gasser. They just wanted that for the street. If we come over here, I'm going to show you another car. This is one of the other gas classes was modified sports. You can see the designation AA modified sports. So AA refers to that it was supercharged, and the modified sports, of course, was the gas class that it was put in. That was for Corvettes and British cars and everything that were starting to show up on the drag strip quite a bit. So how did they get their class designation? Now, that's the important thing. That's where I see a lot of people make mistakes when they're building a car to look like a gasser. They're building a hot rod and they throw a number on or a letter designation on the side, and they think it's right. The way the NHRA factored in the classes was not horsepower per pound like the stock classes did. And they still do that with the stock classes today. It's a factory and NHRA factored horsepower per car. Divide your horsepower into your weight, and then that puts you in the class that you're going to run, whether it's A, B, J stock, K stock, whatever you're going to put into. What they did with the gas class cars is they did it a little different. It was based on cubic inch per pound. So if you had, let's see, if you had a 3,000 pound car with a 427 inch engine in it, that would come out to be 7.03 pounds per cubic inch. So depending on the year, that you might be a B class car, it might be an A class car. So your weight and based on cubic inch is what dictated which class you're going to run in. So I will have a chart at the end of this video that breaks down all the class designations, weight breaks by year from 1960 to 69. That's like the hot spot for the gassers. The gas classes were phased out by the mid-70s. They lingered away. Now, some of the other cool classes that they had outside the NHRA, remember you had the IHRA and the AHRA. Those classes were, they had hot rod class, and they also had the formula classes. And I don't know those too well. I think Hot Rod Association, the American Hot Rod Association had Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3, and IHRA had the hot rod classes. So they were more or less a gas class car. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the supercharged classes. So the A through K class was for your naturally aspirated cars. And the lower classes like the I's, J's, and K's were usually reserved for flatheads and horizontally opposed 4-cylinders, inline 8s, and stuff like that, where the upper gas classes, of course, it was all V8 stuff. When you put a supercharger on your car, early on, that would just bump you up a class. So if you had a car that weighed in for a B gas car, you slap a supercharger on it, now you're running with the A gas cars. That's the easy way they did it early on. Then as the cars got more competitive, that wasn't working. So what they did is they broke off, and the supercharged classes got their own designation. So early on, those supercharged classes would have been A, B, and C. So if you had an A gas car, it would be A gas Supercharged, so A/GS, B gas car, B/GS, and of course C/GS for the C gas cars. That ran till, let's see, I want to make sure we get this right, 1965. So to line things a little better, they changed the class designation, and not all the racers were happy with this designation, so it only lasted for 66 and 67. They changed it so it was AA, double B, or double C were your supercharged classes. So double A/G would have been a supercharged car, and A/G would not have been. Double C/G, supercharged C gas car. That lasted again 66 and 67, but 68 is when they added in one more letter. They went back and added the S again. The double letter stayed, and also you had the GS. So for 68 on up, you had double A B/GS, double B/GS, and double C/GS. Anything that did not have a supercharger would not have those designations. I've seen that written on a lot of cars at different events I've gone to. They just put double A/GS and they think it's cool, but it's not correct because the car's naturally aspirated. So if you're looking to build a correct car, do your research, pick up books like Gasser Wars, Digger's Funniest Gassers and Alters, and of course dig through old stinky magazines because it has a wealth of knowledge in those magazines because they were there printing what was happening at the time. There's a couple websites you should go to, and this one site, the first site I'll give you, is a site where I got a lot of my information on the weight breaks for the classes, and that is gassermadness.com, and I'll put a link down in the description below, and I'll also try to link it right about here, I guess, in the video. In that gassermadness.com, you want to go to Byron's Gasser Madness original page, and it has a good history on the gassers. It's an easy read, and it has a lot of the breakdown of the weight designations and explains why they broke them down the way they did. The other one is georgeclass.net. Now, George Class put together and again, that'll be down in here. George Class has just a pictorial history of hundreds and hundreds of photos of gas class cars, super stocks, factory experimentals, early funny cars, and dragsters. Thousands and thousands of photos. This guy took tons of photos and collected a lot of photos through the years, and he was cool enough to share them on the net for us. So that's georgeclass.net, and that's class with a K. You can check out his stuff there. I will have that chart at the end of the video showing the weight breaks by the year. So if you guys are building a period correct hot rod and want to build a gasser out of one, you can use that to help you. And please check out those websites that I referenced earlier. Pick up these books, hunt for these magazines if you don't have them already, and keep on cruising.